Well, has the government's response now become more complicated with the WHO designation of a global emergency on this coronavirus outbreak? And should that change any of the protective measures the Canadian government has been taking? And what about those Canadians that want to be evacuated from China? From the foyer of the House of Commons tonight, I'm joined by Liberal MP Rob Oliphant, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Stephanie Kusie is the critic for Families and Social Development for the official opposition Conservatives. And Daniel Blaikie is the critic for Export Promotion and International Trade for the NDP. Good to see you all. Thanks for taking time to speak with me. We've heard at length here from Patty Hajdu, the Minister of Health, so let me start with you, Stephanie Kusie. About the government's handling of this coronavirus outbreak and these reports that China might be reluctant to let anyone leave China who may be showing signs of the virus. How concerned are you that those 200 Canadians who are in China and want to be airlifted home might not be allowed to leave?
Well, Peter, I'm certainly very concerned. Of course, I'm a former consul myself with Foreign Affairs Canada, so I've been through the drill of the preparation before, as well as the evacuation before. But our fears are certainly not quelled after a question period today when the government was unable to answer any logistic at all. What we simply got were simply blanket statements regarding concern for the safety of Canadians, both in China as well as Canada, but we did not receive a single detail as to how this entire evacuation process is being handled but for Canadians in China, or how it will be handled once the Canadians get here.
The government makes the case that, look, it's a complicated thing. There's Chinese protocol. It is China. It is a coronavirus outbreak. There's lots of sort of challenges in trying to get this evacuation to take place. What more do you want to hear from the government other than we're trying to get it figured out?
Well, Peter, I can tell you as a former consul, we had to write country strategies. We had to write country strategies that included responses to potential crises in the countries in which we resided, and that included plans for pandemics. So this is something that the government should have been responsible for administrating, for pulling that out of the drawer, putting it into place. We can't control the actions of the Chinese government, but we can control the response as Canadians, as diplomats as well in China. And we have yet to see any logistics, any specifics as to what the government has instructed our Canadian counterparts to do in China to address this.
Mr. Blaikie, we still have no timeline from the government on when those Canadians will be evacuated. What concerns do you have about the response?
Sure. Well, I'm going to start by saying that I think, Canada was strong out of the gate in terms of having a response that made sense several days ago. But the situation's been developing very quickly, and I think we are beginning to get concerned that the government response is not keeping pace with events. So what we'd like to hear is some more details of a plan. We don't want to be alarmist, but we also know that the best way to prevent people from feeling overly fearful or alarmed is to know that their government has a plan in place. We're seeing other governments getting planes on the ground in China. There's different approaches being taken. Some are quarantining for certain periods, some not, some on that end, some on this end. What we want to know is, what is the government's plan, and particularly, when are they planning to let people know? So we'd like to hear a plan tomorrow in terms of some concrete details as to how the government's going to handle this.
Mr. Oliphant, good of you. You're with us for a second night in a row here on the program to help walk us through some of these challenges facing the government. So can you shed some more light on what the government is dealing with in trying to get this evacuation plan together to respond to your colleagues who say you're not giving enough information or you're not moving quickly enough?
I think the most dangerous thing right now would be to pull a dusty old plan out of a drawer and attempt to do a pro forma response. This is a situation that is constantly changing. On Monday, we had 2 Canadians seeking consular assistance. Today, we have 196. We're extremely aware that the situation is fluid. The minister has made arrangements for a chartered airplane. That contract has been let, and we now have a plane at our disposal. We have conversations going on with Chinese officials. The minister will be speaking to his counterpart tonight in China to ensure that we find the best diplomatic solution. China has a responsibility to keep their citizens safe and their residents safe, as well as to stop the spread of the virus. Canada has a responsibility to keep all our citizens safe, including those who are abroad and those who are at home. And so when you play those off, you want to make sure that if we're bringing people home to Canada, it is the best for their health and we don't endanger Canadians here. And so this plan, and it's not as though there's no plan. There are several plans. They're in constant flux, and we will come up with the best plan that meets our needs as a country and to make sure we keep Canadians healthy.
Do you know if this aircraft and crew that's at the ready, is that a Canadian aircraft and crew, or is it a foreign crew, and does that complicate things?
I don't know that. I've spoken to the minister very shortly after he had made the arrangements. This is all I was told. This airplane was one that was used to doing these kinds of evacuations, and the crew was experienced at this kind of work.
But it's not Canadian, is it?
I don't know.
Just quickly, one final thing to you at this in this go-around. Is there a concern that China may not allow those Canadians to leave, especially in light of the global emergency declaration from the WHO just a few hours ago, which does in some part call for tighter restrictions, or may result in tighter restrictions on cross-border travel?
We will be compliant with whatever WHO is suggesting is best for the health of people. The WHO, elevating this to the crisis that they are now saying it is actually designed to help countries that don't have safeguards in place like Canada does. We will follow those guidelines. I can't predict whether or not it's harder or easier for China to do this. What we have experienced is no technical difficulties with China. What they are trying to do is find a way through this so that both countries protect our citizens and stop the spread of the virus.
Stephanie
That's our
Kusie,
goal.
there are lots of questions as well about what to do with the Canadians if and when they're repatriated from China. Should they be placed in quarantine? Because the minister said today none of that's been decided yet.
Well, again, this is the concern, is that we are not hearing any type of a plan with any type of logistics whatsoever. And this is after repeated questions about even the individuals who will be allowed on the flight back to Canada. And our question included concerns as to permanent residents. Will these individuals be allowed on the flight? Unaccompanied minors. I mean, we're not getting any specifics at all in regards to the plan. So, you know, I think we're just, as I said, we're just hearing platitudes about concerns for the Canadians, both in China as well as the health and safety of those Canadians here. And we're getting updates as to the situation, but those are available through the media. What we want to see is a plan of action. And it is up to the government to ensure that these are not, in fact, dusty plans hidden away in drawers. The government is accountable to make sure that these plans are updated on an annual basis, as they should be. So if they are not communicating anything to us in the House of Commons in response to our questions, it leads us to believe that that they don't know what they're doing and that they don't have control of the situation.
I'll come back to Mr. Oliphant. Just quickly on this, Mr. Blaikie, do you believe those Canadians, when they do return, if and when they do return, and it's we think it's a when, should they be quarantined when they get back to Canada?
Well, I mean, these are the kinds of things that we would like to know from the government, frankly, and I think it's incumbent upon the government to be able to provide a plan for that that's based on the best science and evidence. I think the problem is that the longer that the government goes without presenting a plan, the more speculative people are going to get about coming up with ideas about what we should or shouldn't do. This should be a conversation that's grounded in evidence. It should be a conversation that's led by the government with an open and transparent plan. That's where we want to be. So we'd like to be commenting on the government's plan in light of evidence that they're talking about, and we can't get there if the government isn't releasing that information. The only real change in information that we know now is that the government has a plane. We know a lot more details about the virus now that we're 3 or 4 days in than we do about the government's plan on how to deal with it.
Mr. Oliphant, let me have you respond.
And those go hand in hand. We're an evidence-based government, and it's not good enough to have a plan that's updated yearly. We have a plan that's being updated hourly. This is a viral situation in every sense of that word. It's a situation where we're having to deal with a different country. We're having to deal with several unknowns that we are gradually getting information for, but we will not make mistakes. Overall, do no harm. This government will follow evidence-based decision-making. We're working with our like-minded partners. We have conversations going on with other countries that are in a very similar situation. We're learning from them, but we're not going to make a plan. We're making plans for every possible contingency that's happening. That's the responsibility of good government to do it.
Canadians have to hear what some of that planning is. I mean, so all that planning can't just be happening. Like, it's a fluid situation, we get that. But Canadians need some sense of where their government is headed. Particularly people who have family members would like to know like when that plane is going to land, whether their family members are going to be put in quarantine either in China or on this end when they get back.
And our consular officials are in constant contact with those people.
I'm sure you'll have.
They're not in constant contact with everybody. They are in constant contact with officials.
We'll have questions and we'll be looking for answers, and this story will continue, I'm sure. We'll have lots to follow in the days ahead, but thank you all for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Peter.
Thank you.